with Microsoft Endpoint Manager. It'll be presented by Garrett Chandler and Tyler Duncan, both technical specialists at Microsoft. The session will be recorded and will be sent out next week, and there will be time for Q&A at the end, and Tyler will be in the chat throughout the webinar, so feel free to ask your questions as they come to you. If you have any licensing questions, you can reach out to help@oetc.org, and someone from the team will be happy to assist you. And with that, I'll hand it off to you.
Awesome. Thanks, James. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Super excited to be here today with you all. Today, we are talking about getting started with cloud-native Windows endpoints with Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So we are going to introduce, it's like an Intune 101 session, but as opposed to some of the previous Intune sessions that the OETC group has put on prior, we're going to get a little tactical. So we're going to give you the few steps. It's about 10 steps. There's some sub-steps in there, but mostly 10 steps to get started with a fully cloud-native device with Intune. So we're going to learn along the way. I encourage those of you who are new to Intune, sit back, relax, take it all in. It's going to be a fun ride. For those of you that have experience with Intune, I would love for you to get interactive in the chat, share your experiences, help each other out. Tyler's going to be on deck to help answer any questions that come throughout. And then hopefully at the end of the session, we'll have time to address any outlying questions and anything that you may need addressed at the end of the session. It's going to be about an hour, might go a little bit over. This is scheduled for about an hour and a half, so hopefully we'll have lots of time for questions. So with that, let's get started. Really quick, I should introduce myself. My name is Garrett Chandler. I am an education technical specialist at Microsoft. I have been with Microsoft just under 5 years. Prior to that, I was a system admin in a K-12 school district in Door, Texas. So I understand your reality very well, and just excited to be here with you guys today. I'm also joined with Tyler Duncan, who has a similar background as me, but he's recently joined Microsoft, and I'm just excited that he's here to support this group. The agenda for today, we're going to introduce Intune, or Microsoft Endpoint Manager. We're going to introduce a concept known as Zero Trust and how they fit together. We're going to give you an introduction to cloud-native Windows endpoints, and then we're going to walk through some steps on how to build your first cloud-native Windows endpoint, right? We're going to set up the environment, we're going to manage the device configurations, applications, and updates, and then we'll actually build the device together. Then we've got some looking forward and resources. What are those next steps? Where do I go from here? And hopefully this will be a great toolkit for you to get started. This session will be recorded. The deck will be handed out to you. We actually made it interactive for you so you can walk through it yourself. There's lots of active links for additional resources and ways to expand your knowledge on the platform. And then just know that we are doing a 101 session today, and then next week we're actually doing a 201 session. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into some of the concepts and get more into the console. So yeah, so let's kick off with Zero Trust. When it comes to security, right, Zero Trust is the foundation. It's a security model that reduces risk by explicitly verifying data points such as identity, location, device health for every access request without exception. So these principles of Zero Trust are fundamentally verify explicitly, use least privilege access, and assume breach. When we think about Zero Trust, we know that every organization on the planet has security concerns, right? We know that you've got to be able to adapt and respond to these threats. And so when we think about Zero Trust, it's a methodology or a framework that you can follow to think about how you implement new technologies. So verify explicitly, we're just saying, well, you've heard the term, right? Trust but verify, right? Most people are familiar with that. In this case, we are saying never trust, always verify. So we want to ensure that we know who you are or what device is that's accessing the resources on your network, and we're gonna validate that. The next point is once verified, users and device have limited access to only the necessary resources that they need to do their job, right? So least privilege access. And this really falls into the assumed breach category, which is we know that all of our systems are penetrable, right? We know that nothing that we design is 100% perfect. You've got two types of organizations, those who have been breached and those who have been breached and just don't know it. And so when we think about assuming breach, we want to design our systems in a way that we know or expect it to be breached. So when we're leveraging verify explicitly and using least privilege access, then we know if this system is breached, that blast radius is not as far as it needs to go. And so when we think about zero trust, it's across our entire stack, right? Identity, endpoints, data, apps, infrastructure, network. When it comes to Microsoft Endpoint Manager and where it falls into line here, it really focuses on the first two concepts of identity and endpoints. Right? This is where Microsoft Endpoint Manager fits into the strategy of zero trust. Right? It's our end users and the devices that they're interacting with. So we're going to talk a little bit about how this comes into play and really can shore up your security posture, because everything we do is in the name of security. And so when you think about that, right, when you think about endpoint management and where it fits into your security strategy, you know that you need a comprehensive solution. You need a cross-platform solution for Windows, iOS, Mac devices. You need a single pane of glass for simplified management. You've got to be able to assign device configurations to tweak the device experience for what you need it to be. We need to secure those devices and the applications, following those zero trust principles. On top of that, though, we need to streamline our deployments with zero-touch provisioning. And we also need to get rich insights and analytics back so we can improve that employee experience. And then further, in this world of hybrid work, we need to transform remote computing, right? So we need an endpoint management solution that's even going to cater to our VDI solutions. And that's really where Microsoft Endpoint Manager fits in, right? We want to be able to manage our Windows devices in a modern way, shifting to the cloud management with Endpoint Manager, taking advantage of services like Autopilot and Endpoint Analytics. But we also need to cater to those mobile endpoints, right? All the devices that our end users are using, all in the name of security, right? So focusing on the endpoint security perspective, that's where Microsoft Endpoint Manager really shines. And so you might be familiar with some of these tools, right? Maybe in your environment today, you've got Configuration Manager. You've previously heard this as SCCM. And then now you've also got Intune, and you might be wondering, what is this cloud-based solution? What does it mean for me? What can it do for me? And then you might even hear about all the additional services or solutions out there, things like Windows Autopilot, Endpoint Analytics, Windows Update for Business. I want to make it clear that all of these tools and solutions are encompassed under the umbrella of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So when we say Microsoft Endpoint Manager, we're talking about all of these different solutions. It's a unique cloud-enabled transformative platform for unified and secure endpoint management. Okay, and we're going to talk about how it all fits together. So little history lesson, right? Going back to the good old days of managing PCs in a domain and deploying applications with Configuration Manager, right? We've got these two tools, right? Configuration Manager and Intune. So Configuration Manager lives largely on premises, lives in your data center. You've got servers. If you're an old SCCM admin, you're familiar with management points and distribution points and scaling this out for imaging purposes or WSUS for updates and application deployment. Configuration Manager has been around a long time. It's a mature product at this point. It's still got a long life ahead. So if you're leveraging it today, awesome. But we also now have Intune, right? And Intune is a cloud technology for managing our devices. And again, these two combined together fall under this umbrella of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So when we look at our device estate, right, we've got our on-premises clients. So they could be Windows 11, Windows Server. You're probably managing your servers today with SCCM. Even some Mac devices, right? You may have binded Mac OS to Active Directory before. These are all on-premises, and typically, right, if you think of traditional PC management, right, we would join a PC to a domain. and which again, the device object lives right in Active Directory on-prem. And then we would layer on Configuration Manager to do additional management capabilities. And there's an actual agent that we would install on these devices. But when we think about what the needs of our end users are today, and empowering them to do their best work, we really need a more modern solution to enable them to be both productive and secure in the network, right? In our district network and outside of our district network. And this has never been more prevalent than today, right? In a post-COVID world, we need to ensure that we are managing our devices from wherever they're at. And that's where Intune can come into play. Now, when we think about the modernization as a strategy, and I like to think of it as a methodology versus a destination, we need to take baby steps, right? And in some cases, we just need to make our existing devices on premises cloud aware, right? And we do this through a solution called co-management. And this just means that the device is enrolled in Configuration Manager. We can manage it with Configuration Manager, just as we always have, but it's now cloud aware, right? And Intune can also come into play and manage this for specific workloads. Now, for co-management, one of the things that we have to do to get it co-managed is to join it to Azure Active Directory. And Azure Active Directory, it's just like Active Directory, it just lives in the cloud. We'll talk a little bit more about this in just a minute, but what we need to do first is make it cloud aware through a concept of hybrid joining a machine. So you've got your on-premises clients on the left here. Those are bound to AD. They live only solely in AD on premises, but then we've got co-managed devices that may live in both places and they're managed by both platforms. And then finally, this last construct is cloud native, right? And that's what we're going to talk about today, is that Windows 11 devices only living in Azure Active Directory and only being managed by Intune. We're going to talk about how we can do that. So again, just to kind of level set and make sure everyone's following along, I like to talk about this concept of device identity in Azure AD Join versus hybrid Azure AD Join. So this first column over here, hybrid Azure AD Join, again, this just lives. That means the device object lives on premises in Active Directory, and then that device object is synchronized up into Azure Active Directory. That belongs to your tenant, and we'll get to explore the portal, and I can show you a little bit more in just a moment. By enabling this, right, to make it cloud aware, then Intune has visibility into this device object, and it can manage it with Intune. Then we have the concept of Azure AD joining. And again, Azure AD join just means that the device object lives solely in the cloud. There is no device object that lives in on-premises AD. It doesn't exist there. So this is kind of the North Star for Microsoft. We want to start seeing people make their way towards an Azure AD join state for their devices. And we'll talk about some ways that we can get there. And then finally, just so that you have your own knowledge around the subject here, personal devices, so our BYO devices, because Microsoft Intune is a full-fledged mobile device management solution. We can manage all devices. Then those personal devices such as iOS, Android, even some Windows devices, those can be registered with Azure Active Directory. And this just is a state as a personally owned device, and certain policies will take effect, but not all policies will take effect. And so this is really good when we think about security, right? We can manage just the applications on those devices, but we have to know about them. And that's where we have the concept of Azure AD registered. That we won't get too far into that today. We're really going to focus on the Azure AD join column. I know I'm kind of skimming by this and summarizing very quickly. There was actually an OETC presentation done by my colleague, Richard Balsley, who went in depth with this and talked a really long time about how all of this works together and everything. I encourage you, I threw a link on this deck. I encourage you to go watch that. He talks about like 20 minutes in depth on this. I just wanted to touch on this to make sure that we're all level set on the concept here. All right, so let's talk about paths to modern management. I like to think about it in two ways. The first is existing devices, so the devices that live in my estate today, and then new devices coming in. So again, I'm summarizing some of the concepts that we've already talked about, but mostly today, right, you think about customers and what devices may exist in their environment. You either have Configuration Manager or you don't, but in most cases, those devices do live in Active Directory. What we can do to make these cloud aware is to move them to hybrid Azure AD join, right? It's very simple to do. It's just a tool that we call Azure AD Connect. It lives on a domain controller. We just create the service connection point for that, and then we use a group policy to enable these devices to become hybrid joined. Again, that presentation that Richard did goes into great detail on how to do this. And then once they are hybrid joined, once Azure AD knows about these devices, once the cloud knows about these devices, then we can layer in Intune and enroll these devices into Intune as an MDM. In some cases, we could actually remove that configuration manager agent if we wanted to, right? If we determine that it's sufficient enough for our needs. So that's how we think about existing devices without a lot of headaches in getting them converted over or cloud aware. But with new devices, we want to think differently, right? We want to try something a little bit new. And so we are going to talk about today about Autopilot, and we're going to use Autopilot as the entry point into Azure AD and Intune. We're going to talk about the concept of provisioning new devices and then making them cloud native, born in the cloud. So going from Autopilot straight to a hybrid Azure AD join machine, we can do it. We'll talk a little bit about why you shouldn't do it in a little bit, but we can hybrid join it, and then we can layer in the configuration manager agent if we need to, and then optionally remove it if we wanted to. But what I like to focus on, especially for new devices, is Autopilot, going straight to Azure AD join, enrolled in Intune as an MDM. We could layer on the configuration manager agent later if we wanted to, and then we could later remove it if we need to. But it's right here. This is the focus of today, right? And helping you get started and how do we make the shift? How do we start thinking about things differently? So, cloud native Windows endpoints, right? What we talked about, this right here, an Autopilot join machine, Intune enrolled, Azure AD join, that is a cloud native Windows endpoint, right? This is some of the characteristics that I laid out on cloud native Windows endpoints right there. It's a modern OS, provisioned and managed from the cloud. So Windows 10 or Windows 11, again, leveraging Autopilot to enroll into an MDM like Intune. In some cases, this is going to enable us to ship devices directly to users to get them enrolled without that on-premises connection, right? So another characteristic, once they're using the device, right, the end user or the applications that are on that device don't need access to other services that require a VPN or anything, right? It's only for cloud-based resources, accessing them anywhere. We don't need to have an on-premises connection back to our DC or anything like that to enable our employees to be productive or for our devices to be secure. Azure AD join, we talked a lot about this already, but it's going to eliminate that hard dependency to the on-premises connectivity and resources. Another thing is that it's going to include the configuration, data, apps that are portable and that roam with the user. And what's going to be really nice about this is it's going to make resetting our devices vastly easier because everything's synced to the cloud, right? It all lives there. We can reset the device if we have any issues with it. We can restore the device and all of our files come back on. It really makes a great end user experience for our employees when we have an issue with the device, or if we get a new device, right? We provision a new device, it comes down everything that we've needed before. And then finally, from a management perspective, right, it's not going to require that on-premises connection. So simplifying the endpoint management experience, any of the requirements to become secure, to be managed, we're just eliminating that where possible. So these are the characteristics that define a cloud native Windows endpoint, and we're going to talk about how we can get there. This is probably my favorite slide of the entire deck, and I want you to soak it in because this is what a modern managed device looks like. This is it, with all the tools and the services coming out of it. This, I think, summarizes it great. The first is that we need to get Intune going, right? Intune is going to deliver configuration policies, security policies, update policies, our applications. Windows Update is going to deliver our feature updates, our quality updates, and driver updates coming soon. Super excited about. It's provisioned through autopilot. Our Office updates are coming through the CDN, and then leveraging Azure AD. We can enable MFA, we can enable device compliance policies, really honing in on that zero trust model to ensure that these devices are fully modern managed. In some cases, we may still want to add Configuration Manager into the mix, and then we could extend that infrastructure with the Cloud Management Gateway to make them fully cloud aware with those services. That's outside of the scope of this call, but it is definitely possible, and I want to draw your attention to that. Now you'll notice that in the center of the screen, I've got a Windows 10 device and a Windows 11 device. Both of these are considered modern OSs, right? They're still being serviced. We're innovating in these spaces. But you may be asking yourself, Windows 11? Should I be looking at Windows 11? Yes, you should. And actually, I'm going to share with you that as of 23 minutes ago, hot off the presses, we've just announced the latest update to Windows 11, the 2022 update. So if you've been thinking about trying out Windows 11 and you haven't taken the dive and deployed any yet, now is a fantastic time to start building a proof of concept, start playing around with it, managing it, and from a cloud native Windows perspective, start Windows 11 born in the cloud, right? Start it being enrolled in Intune, start it being joined to Azure AD. It's a perfect opportunity for you to start learning some of these new tools and processes and modernizing those practices in your environment. So awesome. Some of you are already 75% Windows 11. I love it. That's fantastic. Yeah, so a few call outs here. It is simple to deploy, manage, and secure. We're going to talk about that today. More accessibility options to make sure that we're meeting all the needs of our students in particular to ensure that we provide a great learning experience. And great performance on affordable devices that are built for education. So again, we'll share out some of the links. Renan's already got it. The new update is already out, available, so start downloading it and testing it. All right, let's get into the meat of this call. The way that I've approached this is we're breaking it out into 3 phases. So to configure a cloud native Windows endpoint, we're going to set up the environment. We're going to walk through these steps. Then we're going to build our first cloud native Windows endpoint together, and I'll show you all the steps you need to do to get that done. And then finally, the post management. Again, this is a getting started call, so we're going to start walking you through the basics and the concepts of some of these applications. We're not going to get too deep. We'll get more deep later. And hopefully with more opportunities with OETC, then we can have more dedicated calls. But these are the steps that we're going to take. Again, you'll get this deck, and this deck is fully interactive. So for example, if I click this link, it's going to bring me into the slide that we're going to talk about. The deck will do the same thing for you once you get it. So this should actually be used as a resource to help walk you through this when you want to get started. So let's get started. Oh, wait, before you start, there's a few things you should know. Number 1, the admin centers. The Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center. This is where you're going to go to do most of your configurations, right? So endpoint.microsoft.com. That's going to be your entry point into most of what we're talking about today. I also want to call out that there's an Intune education portal. So I like to call it Big Intune and Little Intune. Big Intune is Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Console, and then the Intune for Education portal is Little Intune. It's the same backend services, but they are different portals used to based on the task that you're doing or who may be administering that task. So most of what we're going to do today is going to be in the main endpoint management console, but we're going to talk about the Intune education portal, and you may see some use cases where you would use that. The other thing that I want to call out is that Microsoft loves management, right? We have management portals for everything, probably too many management portals, to be honest. But some of the things and the tasks that we're going to accomplish, they may be done or better suited in other admin consoles. So like the Microsoft 365 Admin Center for user management, maybe assigning those licenses that we'll talk about. That's a great use case for it. And then Azure Active Directory Admin Center, this is where we'll actually see our devices and we can set specific settings within Azure AD. As you get deeper into your deployment of Intune, and as you get deeper into the Microsoft stack, you may use like the Security Center or the Azure portal for other topics that relate to cloud native Windows endpoints. But by and large, Endpoint Manager, Admin Center, and then M365 Admin Center and Azure AD Admin Center, those are going to be probably your top three. The next thing that you need to know before we get started is that you do have to have rights. So as most of you probably are IT professionals in your organization, you do need to have the global admin rights or at least Intune administrator rights in your tenant before we get started. All the controls that we're going to talk about, if you don't have access to those controls, you're not going to be able to change the settings, right? And you may need to adjust some to get everything right. So hopefully you guys already have this. If not, maybe you can work with your specific global admin to get the access that you need with proper reasoning. I did throw a link in here so that you can learn a little bit more about RBAC controls within Intune. Assuming you have that, the next thing that I want to call out is the network requirements. I cannot stress enough how important these documents are for getting started. So first, let me say that on a new device, let's say you're starting with a new device, and I would encourage you to get either a physical device or a virtual machine and spin one up and just install Windows on it to the point that it gets to the out-of-box experience screen, or UBI. We want to do all of our testing on an open network, right? We don't want trying to connect like with a certificate or anything like that. Creates like a chicken and egg scenario in some cases. So just start on a standard WPA2 or WPA3 network, pre-shared key, something simple to get in. Most of you probably have firewalls and content filters in place. By and large, those are okay, but if you can bypass some of those, even better. But generally, those are a little more difficult to bypass. If you don't have a pre-shared key network or a WPA2 network in your environment that you can connect to easily, hardwire, right? Most hardwire connections, you don't require a certificate or something like that to authenticate. So I would just keep your device authenticated through an Ethernet connection. The next call out that I want to talk about is having the endpoint muted. Hang on. Having the endpoints in your environment connect to the endpoints through the internet itself and everything that needs to communicate from our side. So we've got two documents in here: the network endpoints for Microsoft Intune, Windows Autopilot networking requirements. These documents are going to give you all the ports, URLs, IP addresses that you need to exclude from your firewalls, from your content filters, to ensure that we have proper communication to those endpoints. Before you get started, just follow these two docs. It's going to save you a lot of trouble, a lot of headaches later down the road. While you're at it, there's a third one, which is called Office 365 URLs and IP address ranges. Go ahead and send that to your networking team as well, right? And get all of those, whitelisted or whatever the case may be in your environment, because that's going to improve the post-deployment experience, right? Once we're leveraging Microsoft 365 apps and things like that, Teams, OneDrive, etc. We're going to rely on all of those services. So get those cleared out. I have it called out here that asterisk.microsoft.com, that's not sufficient. So if you have network admins or you are the network admin and you say, well, I've whitelisted.microsoft.com, not sufficient. Follow these docs, get everything whitelisted, and you'll be golden. The next step, which is really like 5 steps in one, is enrollment and licensing. So we're going to walk through enrollment restrictions and what that means, enabling MDM automatic enrollment with Intune. We'll talk about joining devices to Azure AD and the settings that we have available to ensure that we can successfully join devices to Azure AD. And then we'll talk about Azure AD company branding, which is a prereq for autopilot. And then finally, a licensing call, because we are Microsoft and we love licensing as much as we love management. And so you've got to have the proper licenses to do any of this as well. So we'll talk about what you need. So I'm actually going to jump into my endpoint management portal here. I like to do demos where possible. So follow along if you can. Again, if you can see my browser, I'm just here at endpoint.microsoft.com and I can sign in. This is what the home page looks like. And you will notice that we've got, all of the capabilities available to us: devices, apps, endpoint security, etc. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into devices, enroll devices, and then I'm going to click something, let me zoom in here, called enrollment device platform restrictions. Like that, you're going to see a profile here that's default. We're going to click all users. I'm going to go into properties, and then you'll notice platform settings with a small little edit button here. And then click edit. And we have some controls available to us. The only thing that I'm calling out in this slide here is that there is a section under a platform column, under Windows MDM, we have allow. We just want to validate that the allow is set. This is by default, but just in case someone who has been in the tenant prior to you has blocked it for some reason, we want to make sure it's set to allow. If we don't have it allowed, devices will not get enrolled into Intune. Now, if I scroll over a little bit, you'll also notice that there's a column for personally owned devices. I just want to call this out that we have the ability to block personal device enrollments as well. So if you're looking at leveraging Intune in your environment, but only for district-owned devices, you can actually block personally owned devices. You don't need these set to allow, even for the Windows perspective. So everything that we're going to do with Autopilot automatically makes it a corporate-owned device or a district-owned device. Everything else can be blocked. So I just call that out. You don't have to set that if you don't want to, but you can if you do. So again, just make sure that Windows MDM is allowed. The next thing that we want to look at, and I will screen here, is MDM automatic enrollment. So I'm going to go back to devices, back to enroll devices, and then you're going to see a button here called automatic enrollment. I'm going to click that. And you'll notice a few settings. Under this configure, you want to set your MDM user scope, which is the top option here. You want to set it to all if possible. You can set it to some, and you can define a group if you wish. So you could come in here and define a specific group with users such as yourself. If you're just doing a test group of devices, test users, you can put those users in that group and populate that here. It does need to be a user group, so it's the user object that we care about. But by and large, I like to set it for all. That's a best practice. It'll be okay. It may be a little concerning at first, but it should be mostly okay. If you are concerned for any reason, you can just filter that down to only select users in your environment if you wish to via that sum. If you have it on none, then nothing's going to work, right? Automatic enrollment is not going to work. So you do need to have it at least set to some, if not all. You don't really have to worry about the MAM user scope right now. We just care about the MDM user scope. All right. The next thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to jump over into the Azure AD portal. So to do that, we have a portal. If you just go to aad.portal.azure.com, you should be able to log into the Azure Active Directory Center. I have it pulled up just for demo purposes to get here faster. But once you're in Azure AD, you're going to click Devices, and that will bring you to this this overview page right here. So you can see the devices in your tenant. We're going to click Device Settings, and then you're going to see a very similar toggle switch as what we just looked at with MDM automatic enrollment. And this is called Users May Join Devices to Azure AD. Okay. Again, you can have it set to all, which is what's recommended, but you also have the ability to set a selected user group if you wish. Again, we care about the user object here, not device objects. So specify a user group. If you ended up setting a specific group in this column here for automatic enrollment, best practice would be to set it here as well. Just choose the same group. I was actually on a customer site a couple of weeks ago, and that was different. They had two separate groups defined in these portals, and we got inconsistent experiences, and I was kind of beating my head like, why is this happening? Because right here, users couldn't join Azure AD, even though that they could enroll into Intune. So remember the group that you selected, and just choose the same group for troubleshooting purposes. Once you do that, you're going to enable users to be able to join devices directly to Azure AD. And again, that's a prereq for autopilot to work. Again, I would say go ahead and select it all if you're comfortable, otherwise select a group. The second to last piece is company branding. So again, I'm just jumping into Azure AD. If you scroll down on the left-hand navigation bar for Azure AD, you're going to see a company branding node. Just click that, and then you'll see a policy here that you can define with your company logo, some information like sign-in page text, username hints, things like that. Again, this is all prereqs for autopilot to ensure that your end users know that this device belongs to your organization. So we rely on this company branding to develop or generate that experience for our end users to know that. So you'll want to populate this prior to getting started with autopilot. Pretty simple. I think there's some restrictions around like the image sizes and things like that, but it defines it all within the portal for you, so you know exactly what you need to upload. And then finally, is the licensing. Now you can actually do this through the Azure AD Admin Center if you're familiar with it. I actually like assigning licenses in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center more. But all you want to do is find your users and just validate that they have the correct licenses installed or enabled for their account. And I'm going to scroll down on this right-hand pane and just validate that I have Microsoft Intune and Microsoft Intune for Education checked. The other one that we'll want is Azure AD P1. So those are the two or three licenses that you'll need to get started to ensure that you'll have successful enrollment into Intune and that they join Active Directory correctly. I kind of breezed over that really quick, but everything in the deck that you'll get will highlight this and we'll walk you through those particular steps that you need. So if you didn't catch something, this is recorded, right? But I actually step-by-step walk you through everywhere you need to go and set these particular settings. In some cases, I also throw the additional links in there for you to go learn more about those, specifically around the licenses. I wanted to jump to this page really quick because I do call out that, you know, if you've got the Intune or the Intune for Education license, awesome. In some cases, this might be bundled under the Microsoft 365 A3 or the Enterprise Mobility and Security EMS E3 bundles in your environment. So you may see Intune and Azure AD P1 all under those two bundled within the console itself. Most of you are probably already using group-based licensing or something like that, which automatically license your end users. In a lot of cases, this should already be checked, but if not, you'll want to modify those licenses. Again, while you're at it, as a best practice, you might go ahead and assign a Microsoft 365 apps, Teams, OneDrive, and a Windows 10 or 11 enterprise or education license to your end users. Again, just to simplify the experience post.
Garrett, you're on mute.
Thanks. I just got a notification that said you've been muted. All right. At this point, that should be what you need to get started so that everything that we do from here on out works well, right? Assuming there's no service outages or anything like that, most of what you need will be operational based on those settings that we went through. So fundamentally, start there. If you check all those boxes, then you're on the path to success. So the next thing that we want to talk about is autopilot. Autopilot, again, is going to be our method of entry into Azure AD and to Intune, especially for new devices. We could repurpose old devices, and we'll talk about that. But mostly for new devices, it's a great experience. So for those of you who are new to Autopilot, Autopilot is a service from Microsoft that allows us to provision new devices that belong to our end users, but it also belongs to the district or the organization of your choice, right? So when you go and actually purchase new devices, there is a unique identifier on each device called what we refer to as a hardware hash. And so this device ID is actually going to be synchronized up into the Windows Autopilot service. From there, that Autopilot device ID is going to be associated with your particular tenant. So when you order new devices, you can actually establish a relationship with the partner, and they can create that synchronization between the Autopilot service and your tenant so that the device ID goes to the right tenant. Once we have that device ID up into the Autopilot service, that device can be shipped out to an employee or to a student. And once the device comes online and it connects to a network for the first time, it's going to communicate with the Autopilot service, and it's going to pull down any profiles that we've built that aligns with that device ID or that we've associated with that device ID within the Intune console. So if you're familiar with device enrollment program with Apple for iOS or Mac devices, this is the same concept, just for Windows devices with Microsoft, right? We're going to build our profiles, we're going to build our groups, and that's going to align the device IDs themselves to the profiles within the Intune service, and that's what we'll do today, and I'll walk you through that. What's really nice about this is that this allows us to get out of the imaging practice, right? Because traditionally, if you think about PC management as we've always done it, you can acquire a new device or procure a new device. It comes in, there's an image already laid on that disk, right? The OEM has put Windows on that device. Then you bring it into your warehouse or to the campus, you re-image it with your own corporate image, right? That you've got to build out, you've got to modify, you've got to update and keep patched, keep secure. That can be a really timely and costly process. And typically we also see, you know, drivers included with that imaging process or applications included with that imaging process. I would say I mostly see an imaging process take roughly between an hour to an hour and a half at most customer sites. I've seen it down as low as 15 minutes, which is a really good time. But I've also seen it all the way up to 2 hours. But it's generally in that hour to hour and a half time frame it takes to image a device. With Autopilot, we don't need to maintain those images. We don't need to maintain the drivers, right? We're going to actually leverage the existing Windows install on the disk that comes from the manufacturer. We're going to provision it. We're going to transform it into our corporate image, right? We're going to get those apps layered on and everything that we need from the Intune service itself. That gets us out of the management of drivers and things like that for the most part. And it's a simple process. Again, when COVID hit and most organizations went remote, I had two primary conversations. One was spinning up teams for remote learning, and the second one was getting Autopilot going to ensure that we could manage our devices remotely and get end users new devices quickly. So having a simple process for our end users to enroll devices, yes, even students can do it. I've deployed 25,000 devices to students, and all they need to do is sign in, and it's going to enroll the device. It can be done. It's a simple process, right? And we're getting out of the imaging practices for this. Now, you may not get out of imaging entirely, right? If a new hard drive comes in, you may still need to get an OS laid on that disk. So you may still want to maintain some images, but for the most part, Autopilot allows us to streamline our processes and modernize that deployment experience. When we upload our devices up into the Autopilot service, we have some properties that are attributed to it, right? We've got some things like the device hash itself, but then we've also got things like group tags, which allow us to categorize who owns that device. A group tag could be anything that you want. It could be like student or a lab or a campus name or something like that to help you kind of organize where those devices are and help you target specific profiles and applications to those devices. And we're going to do one of those today, and I'll show you a little bit more of what that looks like. I've thrown in a couple links where you can have some guided experiences or walking through an Autopilot experience itself, but we're going to do it today, so hopefully this is sufficient. Before I move on, it's important to know that there are a few different modes or scenarios for Autopilot. The first one that we're going to talk about, and this is what we're actually going to do today, is what we call user-driven mode. So when we deploy a new device with autopilot, we're actually able to skip that out-of-box experience screens. We're going to accept a lot of the defaults and everything. It's going to prompt the end user for a sign-in experience where the user just authenticates directly to that device, to your organization, and then autopilot takes it from there. This is the really simplified experience and what we're going to focus on today. This is going to Azure AD join the machine, not hybrid join it. We can do user-driven with hybrid Azure AD join as well, but it's not recommended. It's a little bit more complicated of a process. There's more points that are disjointed, more areas that could break, cause some difficulty troubleshooting, right? It is fully supported. So if you need to use this, if you decided that hybrid Azure AD join is a great fit for your organization, totally supported and you can do it. It's just going to be a lengthier process. And in some cases, the cost benefit as opposed to imaging may or may not weigh out, right? It just kind of depends because you do have to have an on-premises connection to get the device hybrid joined correctly. So I throw it up there as not recommended. It's possible, just generally not recommended. Those two are both user-driven modes. The next one that we have is self-deploying mode. And self-deploying is where we do not need to provide credentials to automatically join the device to Azure AD. Right, that sign-in process that I talked about with user-driven mode, that doesn't exist. So this is going to be great for scenarios like labs, shared devices, kiosk machines, those where the device doesn't belong to a user. And then there is a requirement for that one, TPM 2.0. So some of your newer devices will be able to do self-deploy well. Older devices, that may be a bit of a challenge. So know that there is that requirement for TPM 2.0 for self-deploying mode. And then finally, the last mode is pre-provisioning. And pre-provisioning is a scenario where, let's say that we've ordered new devices directly from an OEM. The OEM can actually provision those devices with the autopilot service at their warehouse before it ships to the end user or to you. And so it will actually pre-provision, it'll get profiles, it'll get apps, different things that you've set it to deploy, and get the device to a more business ready state than before. So you don't have to go through an OEM to do this. You can configure this for anyone. So if you just want to accept those new devices and have your techs at the warehouse pre-provision those devices before they're sent out to the end user, that's definitely a use case there. But in other cases, you could have the OEM or the manufacturer do it or a partner do it. That may come as a cost. So just a heads up there, right? That service that they provide, that may come as a cost, but it is a viable solution. So again, what we're focusing on today is a user-driven mode with Azure AD. So let's do one. And this is where we come into step 3, where we're actually going to import a device. So I'm actually going to show you how we can do this. This is a virtual machine that I have in my environment. We're still at the out-of-box experience screen. This one actually already has an autopilot profile assigned to it, as you can tell, because I turned this device on and it says, welcome to sysadmin edu, which is my organization. You'll even see that the sign-in screen, right, says someone at sysadminedu.com, because we want to tell our end users, yes, this is where you're going to sign in with your district credentials. In most cases, if I were to back up here, we can go back to like the language screen. Oh, well, I guess it actually prevented me from doing that, but that's okay. What we can do is we can hit Shift F10, and we are going to collect that hardware hash that I talked about earlier, and we are going to import it into our tenant. So the first thing that we can do is just check to validate that we have connectivity to the internet, because we do need to have connectivity to the internet to pull the latest script down. We're going to install a script on this machine, and then we're going to import that device. So we want to pull the latest one, and then we're actually going to import the device in our tenant. So we need that internet connection. And then we can open up PowerShell just from this command prompt, so we can execute specific commands. We can run set execution policy using tabs. I'm going to do scope for this particular process. I am just allowing PowerShell to I have to spell process correctly. I'm just telling PowerShell, I'm about to run a script. Please let me run a script. That's all I'm doing right here. And then I want to run a command called install Windows install script, get Windows autopilot info. And this is going to install a script. And then I can run a command called get Windows autopilot info .ps1. I'm going to specify a group tag, and I'm going to say cloud native. And I'm going to do another parameter called online. So let me show you really quick why this is important. Essentially, what we're going to do is this script is going to run in the background. It's going to collect the hardware hash. We're going to append to this device ID a group tag, which we're calling cloud native. You could use any group tag that you want. You could say student, you could say a school name, you could say a district name, whatever you want can be in this group tag. And then we are going to use the parameter online. And the online parameter says I'm going to take that hardware hash, I'm going to upload it into my tenant. So when I do this, I'm actually going to authenticate directly to my tenant. So just a minute, it should prompt me. Again, this is just a test device. I have it on a virtual machine. You could do this with any virtual machine running Windows 10 or Windows 11. And you could also use it on a physical device, right? And you just need to be out the out-of-box experience screen. Okay, tell you what, I have a backup because it's not working here. Once we run this script, it's going to install a package. It's going to prompt you 2 questions you'll say yes to, and then the last one you'll say all to. So 3 times you'll be prompted. Once you do that, it's going to ask you to authenticate to your tenant. You're going to sign in with your username and password of the tenant admin, so the one that has global admin rights or Intune admin rights. It's going to authenticate. Takes a little bit, but you'll notice right here, the device is going to be imported into your tenant, and then you're going to see a line that says 1 device imported successfully, if all goes well, right? By doing this, we are essentially taking that device and we are making it autopilot ready. We're making it autopilot aware so that we can start assigning a device profile to it, an autopilot profile to it, and an enrollment status page. So to close this, I'm going to go back to my deck. So again, just run these few lines here, and this is going to import that test device into your tenant. Now, I've also included a couple links in here for you to manually register to existing devices out there, because you can leverage existing devices in your tenant. You just need to reinstall Windows and import that device information directly into Autopilot. If you run this script, you also have the ability to create like a CSV file if you wanted to, because it's just PowerShell. And so we actually, in the Autopilot pane within Endpoint Manager, we actually have the ability to upload a CSV of different hardware hashes. In a lot of cases, I also see that our partners, so let's say you're ordering new devices from Dell or HP or something like that, when you order those devices in bulk, you may actually receive a CSV file to automatically upload that bulk list of devices directly into Endpoint Manager, into Autopilot. And so you can leverage that feature directly. Again, just for this test device, we're going to do it in a more streamlined manner to get that device Autopilot aware. Again, those links exist there, so if you want to walk through those more in depth, you absolutely can. All right, so once our device is imported, now we need to build a group. And I'm going to minimize this again and show you in the Endpoint Manager console what this looks like. So you can actually come in here to groups. I'll just do this with you really quick. And we're going to say new group. In here, we're going to choose a security group, and we're going to give it a name. Cloud Native Endpoints, for example. You can give it a description if you want. You also have the ability to say Azure AD roles can be assigned to the group. Just say no for now. Membership type, instead of assigned, we're going to change it to dynamic device. Down here at the bottom, you're going to notice that there's a little asterisk next to dynamic device members. We're going to click Add Dynamic Query. And we're brought into this view that can be a little overwhelming, but we're allowed to choose different properties, and we can build our dynamic device group off of certain properties. So things like device model or OS type, all different kind of device trust type. That means Azure AD joined or hybrid Azure AD joined. We can build our groups however we need. But in this case, what I want you to do is just come over here to the far right and click this edit button next to rule syntax. And you will see this pane pop up. And in the documentation that I've provided, I give you the actual syntax that we're going to put. And you'll notice that what we're saying is any device physical ID, so any devices that have been uploaded into the autopilot service, if they equal that order ID, which the order ID is the group tag. Don't ask me why group tag and order ID are used synonymously. They are, but order ID just means we're going to specify the group tag. And then right here where I have cloud native, that's going to be the group tag. So again, if you use student as your group tag, if you use a school name as your group tag, whatever the case may be, you're going to populate that here. Again, for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to use cloud native. And I'm going to build my group on the cloud native group tag, which is what I uploaded, right? I specified that group tag when I uploaded the autopilot device. I'm going to skip over this because I've already done this in my environment. But I will show you because I have built a cloud native PC that automatically, when those members come in, you're going to see that those devices actually fall into place into this group. Now, this group is super important because this is the group that we're going to target our autopilot profile, our enrollment status page, some applications, device configuration profiles, everything that we're going to do with this autopilot device, we're going to target it to this group. So we want to make sure that we do it right from the first, from the get-go, really, so that we know what we're assigning all of the other parts and components of the autopilot equation, if you will. All right, so I've got actually members in my devices here. I do want to show you, if we go into devices and we go into enroll devices, you're going to see there's a whole autopilot section here. Under this devices pane, you're going to see all of the devices that have been imported into my autopilot environment. You'll notice that I've already got 3 that have the cloud native group tag in there, but they're ready to go. So these devices now belong to that group. So we are going to move forward, and we've got to pick up the pace just a little bit because we are running a little bit behind. Okay, so we're going to build out this group, and with that dynamic syntax, you'll be able to assign any devices that belong to that specific group tag to that device. Now, I wanted to call out a few things about groups really quick. There's 2 types of groups in Intune. We've got security groups and Microsoft 365 groups. Security groups are largely going to be what Intune leverages in your environment. You can leverage an M365 group as long as it's security enabled, but other groups exist in your Microsoft 365 tenant for ones that have been used for like Teams or Exchange Online. You may see those Microsoft 365 groups in there, but Intune is going to leverage security groups as well as Azure AD. We talked a little bit about the membership types. Just know that there's assigned, dynamic user, and dynamic device. On this screen here on the right-hand side, I've put an example of what it looks like when we assign a profile or an application to a group. I've color-coded this a little bit. Hopefully you can all see this, but under the included groups section, there's an add groups. This is going to be all the Azure AD groups that exist in my environment. So you can see in the example below, I chose a specific group, which is librarians. So if I wanted to target an application to all librarians, then I can use that Azure AD group to do so. But next to the add group section, you're going to see in blue an add all users and an add all devices. These are what we refer to as virtual groups. Virtual groups are nothing more than groups that we created on your behalf. So we own them. You can't modify them. But the add all users, add all devices, they do exactly what they say. If you want to target that application to all devices, that's what it's there for. Same with all users. In most cases, you'll want to start with just specifying Azure AD groups, but then you may notice that if you target things like all devices or all users with those virtual groups, things process a little bit faster. And so as you get more into Intune and more in depth with it, you may start leveraging those combined with something that we call filters, which is what you see in the yellow, kind of the highlighted yellow area. We'll talk about filters a little bit more next week, but just know that filters are there for you to create. So if you wanted to say all devices, but then you want to get more specific and say, I want just the Windows 11 devices, you can build a filter on just Windows 11 devices. Don't do anything with filters just yet as you're learning and exploring, but you may find that they are of benefit to you. So a couple of best practices: avoid recreating that all users and all devices group. If you do that, processing is going to take a long time when you're deploying applications, deploying profiles, and you may be sitting there for like an hour saying, I've targeted my all device group. Why don't I see this application coming down? If you've built your own all devices group, it could take a little bit of time for that processing to happen. So just leverage those virtual groups where possible. The other thing that I wanted to call out was when you're building your groups, reuse groups where possible. So instead of building out application deployment groups for each campus that exists in your environment, just create a Chrome group, right? And you just target those specific members or that application to the members of that Chrome group of whoever's supposed to get that. We have the concept of included and excluded groups, so you can build on that. But don't create, campus A Chrome, campus B Chrome. Try to avoid that where possible, and simplify your management experience from there. And then finally, once you're comfortable with group targeting with Azure AD groups, then you can start leveraging filters built on those virtual groups. Again, I've added a few links for you to go learn a little bit more about that, but I wanted to call some of those best practices out. Okay, the next step is we are going to configure the enrollment status page. So I'm going to jump back into my environment here. And I am actually going to come into the Windows Enrollment section again. So again, you can get into this through the Endpoint Manager Admin Center, go to Devices, go to Windows Enrollment. And then there's a section here called Enrollment Status Page. You are going to build a new enrollment status page. And under the settings, it's going to walk you through a little wizard. I've included all the settings that you need to define in here. But what I want to explain about the enrollment status page is this is an indicator for your end users to know where in the provisioning process the device is at, right? Do I have my apps installed? Have I been successfully enrolled into Azure AD, successfully enrolled into Intune? It's going to give you a visualizer of where it's at. But what's neat about this is that you can actually come in here and you can block device use. So it's not going to get to the desktop for your end user to use the device until certain applications are installed. So this allows you as the IT admin to come in and say, you know what, my top 3 apps that are required for every end user to do their job, maybe it's a specific web browser, maybe it's a HR app, whatever the case may be, line of business app, whatever it may be, that says you need to ensure that these devices or these applications are on that device, you can control that here. Now, this is not meant as a sequenced app install, right? It's just going to tell the autopilot service that I can't use this device until specific apps are installed. And so in the instructions that I provide for you to do that, it'll walk you through that. So once we have our enrollment status page created, then we're actually going to assign it to that exact same group that we just created. So if you'll notice here under the assignments pane, I have mine targeted to a cloud native PC group that I just created. So I've created my group. That autopilot device that I've imported is now a member of that group through that dynamic syntax. And now I've created an enrollment status page and assigned it to that same group. The next step is we're actually going to create the autopilot profile itself, and we're going to sync that device. So I'm going to jump back into my demo environment, and I'm going to come in here. And under that enroll devices section again, you'll see the Windows autopilot section, and there's a deployment profiles node. We're going to click that, and then I've created a new autopilot profile, and the properties of this include user-driven and Azure AD join. I've decided to hide things like the licensing terms, the privacy settings, the account options, the user account type I've set as standard so that the new users are standard users, not admins. And then I've accepted the defaults. You have the ability to name a device here. I would keep it simple. So just add a prefix and then a serial number. So maybe the campus name or staff type or student type, whatever the case may be, and then the serial number to ensure that we know we have a little bit of a unique name, but it's gonna automate that naming process for us. And then what we're going to do once we have our configuration is we're going to assign it to that same group. Again, in our assignments, we're going to assign it to that Cloud Native PCs group that we just created. At this point, we can go back into our devices. We'll sync our devices as we need. And then what you're going to notice is that the device that we have been testing with, so we'll take this one for instance, we know that it's our test device because of the group tag under Cloud Native. That profile has now been assigned. So we just built that profile and now that device has been assigned that profile. In the event that it's not assigned yet, you'll see it noted as not assigned. And then if you even catch it at the right time, you'll see it in progress or it says assigning. So it's in the process of assigning that profile. Once you've got that profile assigned to that device, again, you're just assigning that profile to that group, which therein takes effect on the device itself. Then you're able to actually walk through autopilot on that device. So that's how all the pieces kind of come together to ensure that the device knows that the autopilot service exists and we're there. All right, so the next few portions, and I'm going to breeze past this pretty quickly, is the ability to install applications and settings for our devices. So a little bit about applications. We do support just shy of 20 specific app types. We have full support for app deployment within Microsoft Intune. You've got line of business apps, you can do web links, and then more importantly, we have store apps. So this is going to be cross-platform, right? We've got store apps for Windows, and then we also have the App Store for iOS and iPadOS devices. We've got the Google Play Store or managed Google Play Store for our Android devices. We do have the ability to do VPP token synchronization, things like that for those other platforms. We have all of this is built directly into the Microsoft Endpoint Manager wizard. So we have the ability to add all the applications that you may need. And then I also wanted to call out that we have something called the company portal. And the company portal is a self-service portal for you to go and install applications on demand, right? End users can open this application, install what they need, and go on about their merry day. The company portal app also allows like device compliance check-ins and things like that to ensure that the device can access organizational resources, which is really nice. And then finally, know that we have a Microsoft Store for Education, and this is where you can find and acquire and manage apps specifically for Windows. And what we're going to do right now in this next step is we're going to actually deploy the company portal app through the Store for Education through Intune. So what we're going to do is navigate to educationstore.microsoft.com, and we are going to establish a synchronization from the Education Store to Intune, right? We do this by signing in and going into settings and then hitting this distribute tab. I'm going to close these links. And you'll see under management tools section that we have Microsoft Intune. This may be active in your environment. If it is, awesome. That's what we need to ensure is that it's active. If not, you may need to activate it. If you don't see it listed here at all, you can just click Add Management Tool and search for Intune and you'll find it. So that's the first step is we just want to establish that connection. And then the next thing that we want to navigate to is the Shop tab. And we want to show offline apps under the shopping experience. So we're just going to turn that toggle on. And that will allow us to see offline apps in the Store for Education. At this point, we can go up to search the store for the specific application that we want, which is the company portal. So I've already pulled that up here. And once you pull this up, you're going to see that you've got two license types, online or offline. We're just going to choose offline and we're going to choose get the app. By doing this, it's going to synchronize to Intune, and we'll actually see this listed under our apps pane inside of Intune. I'll show that in just a minute. What we have found, and probably why you're probably questioning, why am I telling you to download the offline app? When it comes to autopilot, we want to ensure that the application itself gets installed from the get-go. And so we have learned that the offline app type works best, or the license type works best for autopilot deployments, because we're not having to query the Store for Education service itself to acquire that application. So it's a smoother process, and this allows us to also update the app a little bit better and faster through Intune post deployment. So offline app is recommended for autopilot, and we'll walk you through that in that deck. Again, when we come back into Windows apps, if we go into apps and then we choose Windows, you're actually going to see that the company portal offline app exists, right? All we're going to do is go into properties and edit the assignment to target that same cloud native group. And that's it. All we need to do is assign that application to that group, and it will install. Optionally, I've added the ability to add Microsoft 365, which is Microsoft Office, if you're familiar with the Word, PowerPoint, Excel, etc. So if we go into a new application within Endpoint Manager, we actually have a section here for Microsoft 365 apps. And we actually have a built-in wizard for you to add Office directly into those devices. So if you choose to walk through that and do that, that is your prerogative. You absolutely can do that. I find that a lot of customers want Office installed on the device during that provisioning process. So you can do that and then just assign it to that same group. Okay, we're almost done. Hang with me. So I'm going to open my slide deck. Again, this is just going to walk you through those steps for acquiring that app and assigning it. And the last or second to last thing is profiles, so policies. So Microsoft Intune allows us to define profiles within our environment. You might be familiar with group policy for managing your devices. We're going to do the same thing with Intune, but it's all managed, right? This is an automated process, and we've updated the client side of things for faster processing and better handling of these devices, the profiles in a more modern way. So I'm not going to talk about everything here. Just know that there are 4 different types of configuration profiles that exist out there. One is templates, which is going to be a logical grouping of settings that you can configure a feature or concept. The second one, and this is the one we're going to use today, is the settings catalog. This is going to be a more familiar experience if you're used to group policy for assigning, or building out those profiles and those policies for tweaking the end user experience to what you need to meet your organization's needs. We also have almost, I'm going to say like 90% parity with group policy now within Intune, between 90 and 95% with group policy objects. So if there's one thing that you don't see exposed in the templates or the settings catalog, the admin templates do exist for you to set those specific values as needed. And then we have baselines, which are actually curated by Microsoft security teams that you could leverage in your environment if you wanted to. I just wanted you to know that once we deploy a profile or a policy, the device is going to actually check in to receive those policies every time it turns on, every time it logs, end user logs in, and then 8 hours after that. That's kind of the polling schedule for it. You can sync a device at any given point once you make changes to a specific configuration profile, but you're able to, you can kind of rely on that 8 hours or so for synchronization. And so what I've done is I've given you the instructions to configure settings for an optimal M365 experience. So the 2 settings that I'm having, actually there's 3 settings that I'm having you set, which is disabling that first run experience for Microsoft Edge, because no one really likes that. And then the second one is configuring OneDrive known folder redirect, so that any of our files that we're working on in our environment are automatically synchronized to OneDrive, again, mimicking that cloud native experience so that we can reset and restore these devices very easily. I have this pre-built for you here in my demo tenant, so you can kind of see what it looks like once you're done. But all you're going to do is go into devices, configuration profiles, and we're going to build a new profile. We're going to choose Windows 10 and later. We're going to choose settings catalog. We're going to click create. We'll give it a name, native. We're going to go into add settings, and then we can search. So we could actually come in here and say first run, search for it. You'll see Microsoft Edge pops up. It's going to load. And then we'll see our specific settings here at the bottom. Yep. So here we go. We can actually expand this out, and then we can add this to our profile. Come in here and set enable, and then we're able to add new settings later. So specifically, I want you to set the OneDrive known folder move so that you can see what that experience looks like. That's all we're doing right there, right? This is just showing you that we can create a settings catalog profile. We're going to assign it to that same group that we created in step 4, and then we will see what that experience looks like post deployment. Okay, last component here. We're almost done. Bear with me. Windows Update. The Windows Update itself has always been a challenge, especially in education. We've had, raise your hand if you've had calls where students' work is disrupted because a device suddenly reboots right in the middle of class and they can't do their work anymore. Windows Update for Business is going to aim to help solve some of those challenges. And so we are actually simplifying the management experience and the deployment experience for those Windows updates. I want to make it clear that Endpoint Manager is the one that's delivering the policy to the endpoints that says this is how I want you to behave when Windows Update runs. But Windows Update for Business is the service that's actually delivering the updates. So know the distinction there. We have full support for feature updates, quality updates, driver updates, and then other Microsoft product updates. And we want you to leverage a ring methodology. So you're actually able to create what we call update rings within your environment. And you can create these update rings to target the experience based on personas. So maybe the student update ring looks a little bit different than the staff update ring, etc. I've provided you the configurations that I want you to try. But this automatic update behavior where you auto install at a maintenance time, this is going to leverage our active hours built intelligently into Windows from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. We don't want to install any updates during these times. So typically that's when we see most of our end users working, and we're going to prevent those updates from installing and rebooting the device. But essentially, we're just going to go into devices and scroll down here to update rings for Windows 10 and later. And then we're going to build a new profile. I've already built one here for cloud native update rings. Go into properties. And again, the settings that I provide you are what you'll use to configure the settings. You can tweak this as you need, right? This is just a suggestion to get you started. What I wanted to call out is the ability, once you deploy this, you can actually look at this profile here. You can see the status of both the assignment and how well it's working. But I want to call out these controls here. You'll notice that there's a pause button. And this pause button is allowing us to pause all updates for a specific time. So this is critical for test taking times of the year, right? We can actually pause our Windows updates instead of creating a shared login and having everyone log into the same machine, that same login, because we have the GPO that blocks updates from running or whatever the case may be. All we need to do is pause feature and quality updates, and then we can resume them post once we're done with test taking time, once that season is over. Automatically when you pause it, it's going to pause it for 35 days, which is just about perfect. So would love to get some feedback on that from you guys. At that point, again, you're just going to define your ring. You're going to assign it to that same group, and that's going to configure Windows Update for Business. Again, I call out a few of the specifics here, like pausing those updates so you can test these features out. Next, we're actually going to build the device. So I'm actually going to use this video here because we're out of time, but you can see what the deployment experience looks like. Again, we've got the autopilot profile assigned, we've got the enrollment status page assigned, we've got our apps, update rings, policies configured. Everything is now assigned to this group. So once I click next here from an end user perspective, it's going to walk me through the out-of-box experience screen. Then I'm going to be prompted with my sign in. Let's see if I'm going to sign in as my end user. I'm going to authenticate to our tenant. And I did speed this up just a little bit for demo purposes, which is good because we're running out of time. But this is what the autopilot experience itself looks like. We're going to prepare the device. Then we're going to connect to the tenant, pull down all of those applications. You can see right there, apps 1 of 3 installed, 2 of 3 installed. It may reboot if you rename that device, in which case I did. And then when it comes back, it's going to actually sign you in. This is pretty typical for Windows. You're probably all familiar with this. Again, this is a Windows 11 box, so if you haven't seen this yet, we've updated some of the animations. And in just a moment, we will be brought to the desktop, and I will walk you through. Automatically, you'll see that applications are installed. We've got Teams on there. We've got some other applications. Autopilot's going to finish its user policies if there's any user policies. Then it's going to come to the desktop here. You can see I've got a few applications already installed. And in just a moment, I'm going to walk you through File Explorer, and all of my files came through my OneDrive automatically on the device. This is the promise of modern management. This is what a cloud native device process looks like when we're deploying it. So at this point, congratulations, you've built your first cloud native Windows endpoint. Using all of the tools within Microsoft Endpoint Manager, you're rocking and rolling. Some of the things that I wanted to call out post deployment is that you have now the ability to do things like remote actions. So you can initiate a sync for that device for updated apps or policies. You could locate the device, which is always awesome for schools, for Windows devices. You can initiate a restart. We can even do an autopilot reset, which is like a remote reimaging, where we're going to maintain our join status and our enrollment status with Intune, but it's going to wipe the slate clean for a new user to log in. So it actually comes right back into the login screen, ready for the next user to come in. We could rename the device. So lots of great options there for you to manage that device estate from, from a lifecycle perspective. And then finally, the way that I want you to think about this is in steps. So again, this was designed to help you build your first cloud native endpoint. Think about this in phases. So familiarize yourself first. Start small with a few test devices. Just test the tools out. Get familiar with it. Get your hands dirty. Approach your POC with an open mind. Don't do things the way that you've always done them. Take time to explore those tools and really learn them. Then shift over to start evaluating, right? Inventory your current workloads, identify potential blockers for why you may or may not be able to go to Azure AD Join and Intune Enroll. See what you're losing. There may be a cost benefit there. But I think if you're actually inventorying and looking at this, that's a true evaluation. I want you to ask yourself, what does success look like? Right? What's your end goal? And be clear and hold yourself to that minimum standard when evaluating those endpoints. And then the next point is simplify, right? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Just because I can deploy all of these applications doesn't mean that I need to. Just because I can deploy all of these policies, like all the group policies that may exist in my current environment, do I need to do that again? Maybe not. You can, but maybe you shouldn't. And then the next and final phase would be validate, right? Deploy these test devices in your environment, test them out, collect feedback from other end users and other stakeholders in your environment. See if this is going to be a viable solution for you. And I've thrown in lots of additional resources for you to get started. Specifically, I wanted to call out the Fast Track program, which if you have more than 150 licenses within the A3 stack or the EMS stack, you actually qualify for this Fast Track program. They'll help you do all of this. And the other two components that I wanted to call out was this EDU Endpoint Office Hours team, which is a biweekly call that's dedicated for education customers to learn about endpoint management specifically. I actually host this with a couple of other colleagues. So just it's again, it's bi-weekly call. You can register, you join to a team, you can learn from each other. And then we actually have the education office hours all up, which has more components, right? So not just endpoint focused, but Azure, we have an Azure hour, we have a Office 365 focused one that has predominantly Teams and seems to be gravitating towards. And other ones, there's a security one, so you may check that link out for additional office hours to come and ask your questions. With that, thank you. Tyler, do we have lots of questions?
No, we're actually doing pretty good. I think we've been able to keep up with most of them.
Awesome. Is there anyone that wants to come off and ask a question? Sounds like someone's got to do some more testing. Yeah, I think, cloud native Windows endpoints, this is designed to help you get started. So these are the steps that you need to take, but test it out, right? It's not meant to be, switch over overnight to modern management, but to help you start getting started and learn a little bit more. So give me some feedback. Was this good? Was this valuable? We got a yes. We got a great. All right. Very good. Awesome. All right, guys. Yes, Corey, it was fast. It was so fast. I apologize. There's so much to cover in an hour and a half. Awesome. Again, I will work with the OETC group to get the deck and the documentation out for you guys to be able to follow and work along. Again, this will be recorded, so it was fast, but hopefully we can go back and watch it again as many times as you need, and we can work through it together. If you have specific questions, we're here to answer any of those questions that we can. So feel free to join those other office hour groups and be sure to participate ongoing. And thank you for your time. I see Renan has her hand up.
I just wanted to add something real quick. Some people on the call will have a Microsoft account manager. I saw a question when Tyler posted a DSR, a digital sales rep, but all of our OETC customers, Microsoft customers, will have an assigned Microsoft account manager, depending on where you fall within Microsoft's segmentation. If you have any questions on who that is, feel free to reach out to Stephen, because everybody that purchases off the OETC framework will have somebody directly from Microsoft to contact.